It was exactly 11:47 p.m. when Ethan Brooks began his first overnight shift as a security guard at Ashcroft Central Station. The station had transformed into a completely different world after midnight. During the day, thousands of commuters rushed through its halls without a second thought. But now, every footstep echoed across the empty platforms like someone walking through an abandoned building. The only sounds were the soft buzzing of fluorescent lights and the distant rumble of the final metro train approaching the station. Before leaving, the station manager handed Ethan a ring of old brass keys. "There are only 3 rules during the night shift," he said without smiling. "Lock every maintenance door before midnight. Never enter the old service tunnel beneath platform 3. Then he paused. "And if the last passenger gets off the 11:47 train..." He looked directly into Ethan's eyes. "Don't follow him." Ethan laughed. "Is this some kind of tradition for new employees?" The manager didn't answer. Instead, he quietly picked up his coat and walked away. Now, sitting alone inside the security control room, Ethan replayed those strange words in his mind while watching dozens of CCTV monitors. Everything looked perfectly normal. Platform 1, empty. Platform 2, empty. Platform 3, empty. The clock changed. 11:47 p.m. Right on schedule, the final metro train slowly entered the station. Its brakes screamed against the rails. The doors opened. No one stepped out. Ethan smiled. So much for ghost stories. Then camera 12 flickered. A man wearing a long black coat stood alone on platform 3, perfectly still, his face hidden beneath a dark hat. Ethan immediately looked through the control room window toward platform 3. No one was there. He looked back at the monitor. The man was still standing there. And this time, he was staring directly into the camera. Ethan rubbed his eyes and leaned closer to the monitor. The mysterious figure hadn't moved. He remained frozen at the center of platform 3, hands resting at his sides as if he had been waiting there for years. Trying to stay calm, Ethan switched to another security camera that overlooked the exact same platform from a different angle. The screen showed nothing. The platform was completely empty. He switched back. The man was still there. A strange chill spread through the room. Ethan checked the camera timestamps. Every camera was live. No delay, no recording, no playback. Everything should have matched perfectly. Instead, camera 12 continued showing someone who didn't exist. His radio suddenly crackled. Static. Then a voice, soft, broken. "Don't..." More static. "Follow..." Silence. Ethan grabbed the radio. "Control to maintenance. Do you copy?" Nothing. He tried again. Only static answered. Then another monitor flickered. Camera 4, the station entrance. The same man, standing perfectly still beneath the arrival board. Ethan quickly looked back at camera 12. The platform was now empty. His heartbeat accelerated. How had the man reached the station entrance in only a few seconds? It was impossible. The walk alone took nearly 4 minutes. Then camera 4 suddenly lost signal. Gray static filled the screen. When the image returned, the man was gone. Every monitor returned to normal. The station was empty once again. Ethan looked toward the ring of brass keys lying on the desk. For the first time that night, he considered the possibility that the station manager hadn't been joking. The security control room suddenly felt too small. Ethan grabbed his flashlight, clipped his radio to his belt, and picked up the heavy ring of brass keys. Every instinct told him to stay inside, but curiosity was stronger than fear. He unlocked the control room door and stepped into the silent station. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Long shadows stretched across the polished floor, making every corner look deeper than it really was. Platform 3 was only a short walk away. As Ethan approached, he noticed something strange. The station was completely silent. No ventilation system, no distant trains, no electrical hum. It was as if the entire station had stopped breathing. He swept his flashlight across the platform. Nothing. The tracks disappeared into a tunnel filled with darkness. Then, tap. A single footstep echoed somewhere behind him. Ethan turned instantly. No one. His flashlight illuminated empty benches and closed ticket gates. He waited. Nothing. He convinced himself it had been his own imagination. He took another step. Tap. Another footstep. This time, it came after his own. Almost perfectly timed. Ethan stopped walking. A second later. Another footstep echoed through the station. Someone had taken one final step after he had stopped. His breathing became shallow. "Who's there?" he shouted. Only his own voice echoed back. He slowly turned toward the tracks. Near the edge of the platform, faint, wet footprints crossed the yellow safety line. They continued onto the railway tracks, then vanished. There was no body, no person, just a trail of footprints that ended in the middle of empty rails. Ethan stared in disbelief. Behind him, the station speaker suddenly crackled to life. A calm, automated voice echoed through the empty station. "The final passenger has arrived," the announcement repeated. "The final passenger has arrived." Then the speakers went silent. Ethan's radio burst into static again. Between the crackling noise, he heard something that made his blood run cold. Heavy breathing, not from the radio, behind him. He spun around. Nothing. The platform remained empty. His flashlight beam drifted toward the wall beside track 3. Something caught his eye. A narrow metal door hidden behind years of peeling paint. He had walked this platform dozens of times during training. He had never noticed it before. Bolted to the door was a rusted metal plaque. Most of the letters had worn away. Only 2 words remained readable. Platform 0. Ethan frowned. There was no Platform 0. According to every station map, Platform 3 ended against a solid concrete wall. He pulled one of the brass keys from the ring. The first key didn't fit. Neither did the second. The third key slid into the lock effortlessly. With a loud metallic click, the ancient door unlocked. A freezing gust of air rushed out from the darkness beyond. It smelled of damp concrete, rusted steel, and something older, far older. He aimed his flashlight inside. Stone stairs descended into complete darkness. Fresh footprints covered the dust. Only one set. Someone had gone down recently. As Ethan hesitated, a low mechanical sound echoed below. It sounded exactly like a metro train arriving at a station. But according to the control room, no trains were scheduled until morning. Every sensible thought told Ethan to close the door and leave. Instead, he tightened his grip on the flashlight and began walking down the stairs. Each step echoed through the narrow passage. The deeper he descended, the colder the air became. His breath formed pale clouds. The walls changed from modern concrete to old stone blocks blackened with age. It felt less like a subway station, and more like a forgotten underground ruin. At the bottom of the staircase, the tunnel opened into an enormous underground platform. It was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. Old iron columns stretched into darkness. Broken station signs hung from the ceiling. Ancient ticket booths stood abandoned beneath layers of dust. Then the lights flickered on, one after another. The entire platform illuminated itself. A large cracked station sign became visible. Platform 0. A distant horn echoed through the tunnel. Low, long, unmistakable. A train was approaching. The rails began to vibrate beneath Ethan's feet. Wind rushed through the tunnel. From the darkness emerged an old silver subway train covered in rust. Its windows were filthy. Its headlights barely glowed. It rolled silently onto the platform before stopping directly in front of Ethan. The doors slid open with a slow metallic hiss. Every seat inside appeared empty. Then, a single figure slowly stood up inside the last carriage. The same man from camera 12. Long black coat, dark hat, face hidden. He stepped onto the platform. Without looking at Ethan, he quietly said, "You're late." The man's voice was calm, almost welcoming. "You're late." Ethan's heart pounded against his chest. He raised his flashlight, its beam landing on the stranger's face. But there was nothing unusual about him. He looked like an ordinary man in his late 40s. Pale skin, clean-shaven, sharp gray eyes. His black overcoat looked decades out of fashion, as though he had stepped out of another era. "You've been watching me all night," Ethan said, trying to keep his voice steady. The man gave a faint smile. "No." He slowly shook his head. "I've been waiting for you." A cold silence settled over Platform 0. Behind them, the train doors closed with a loud metallic clang. Without warning, the train pulled away into the darkness. Within seconds, its red tail lights disappeared into the tunnel, leaving Ethan and the stranger completely alone. "There shouldn't even be a station down here," Ethan whispered. "There isn't," the man replied. "Not anymore." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a faded black and white photograph. Its edges were cracked with age. He handed it to Ethan. The picture showed Platform 0 crowded with passengers waiting beside a train. Everyone wore clothing from another time. At first, Ethan studied the crowd without understanding. Then his eyes stopped on one face, his own, standing near the front of the platform, wearing the exact same security uniform he had on tonight. The date printed beneath the photograph read, October 18th, 1986. 40 years ago. Ethan looked up in disbelief. "That's impossible." The stranger nodded slowly. "That's exactly what I said." Ethan couldn't take his eyes off the photograph. His own face stared back at him from a crowd that had gathered on Platform 0 nearly 40 years earlier. The uniform was identical. Even the small scar above his left eyebrow was there. "This is fake," Ethan whispered. "It has to be." The stranger remained calm. "I said the same thing the first time I saw it." "The first time?" Ethan asked. The man nodded and slowly walked toward an old ticket office at the end of the platform. Its broken windows were covered in decades of dust. Inside, shelves overflowed with forgotten files, faded maps, and yellowed newspapers. He placed the photograph on a wooden desk and opened a thick leather ledger. Every page contained names, hundreds of them. Beside each name was a date. Some dated back to the 1960s. Others were only a few months old. Ethan noticed something disturbing. Every entry ended with the same handwritten sentence. "Followed the last passenger." "What is this?" Ethan asked. "The station's record," the stranger replied. "Everyone who came down here." Ethan turned another page. A newspaper clipping slipped onto the floor. "City closes. Platform 0 after deadly fire." The article described a massive underground fire that broke out in 1986, trapping dozens of passengers beneath the station. Rescue teams searched for weeks, but much of the platform collapsed before they could reach everyone. Officially, Platform 0 no longer existed. The government sealed every entrance. The station blueprints were rewritten. Construction records disappeared. Within a few years, people stopped talking about it altogether, as if the platform had never existed. Ethan slowly looked around the enormous underground station. The cracked walls, the abandoned ticket booths, the rusted train tracks. Someone hadn't simply hidden this place, they had erased it from history. Then the stranger quietly said, They didn't erase the station. He looked directly at Ethan. They erased everyone who stayed behind. Ethan's hands trembled as he closed the old ledger. His mind raced, searching for a rational explanation. A forgotten station, a decades-old fire, a photograph that should not exist. None of it made sense. "I'm leaving," he said firmly. The stranger didn't try to stop him. Instead, he stepped aside and pointed toward the staircase Ethan had used only minutes earlier. "You still can." Ethan didn't hesitate. He ran. His boots echoed across the abandoned platform as he climbed the stone stairs two at a time. The freezing air grew warmer with every step until he finally pushed open the heavy steel door. Platform 3. The station looked exactly as it had before. Bright lights, fresh air, clean tiled walls. It was almost 1 o'clock in the morning. Relieved, Ethan hurried back to the security control room and slammed the door behind him. "I'm done," he muttered. He reached for the phone to call the station manager. No signal. Only silence. Frustrated, he looked toward the CCTV wall. Every monitor was black. One by one, the screens flickered back to life. Platform 1, empty. Platform 2, empty. Platform 3, empty. Ethan let out a slow breath. Then camera 12 activated. He froze. The screen showed the security control room. His security control room. His own desk. His own chair. And sitting in that chair was Ethan. The version on the monitor wasn't moving. It simply stared at the CCTV screens. Then, very slowly, the figure turned its head, not toward the cameras, toward Ethan. Their eyes met. The Ethan on the screen smiled. A slow, unnatural smile. Then it raised one hand and pointed behind him. Ethan's blood ran cold. He didn't want to turn around. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but he couldn't stop himself. Slowly, he looked over his shoulder. The room was empty. He turned back toward the monitors. The smiling version of himself was gone. In its place stood the man in the black coat. This time, he wasn't alone. Behind him stood dozens of silent passengers. Every one of them stared directly into the camera. And at the very front of the crowd stood Ethan. Ethan stumbled backward, his shoulder striking the control room wall. His breathing became quick and uneven. The CCTV monitors continued to display the impossible scene. Dozens of silent passengers stood shoulder to shoulder behind the man in the black coat. None of them blinked. None of them moved. Then, all at once, every monitor went black. The room fell silent. A second later, a single screen flickered back to life. It wasn't showing the station. It was showing an old security recording. The timestamp read, October 18th, 1986, 11:47 p.m. The footage was grainy, scarred with static, but the station was unmistakable. Platform 0. Passengers filled the platform, laughing and talking while waiting for the final train. Then the lights failed. Darkness swallowed everything. When the emergency lights returned, thick smoke poured from the tunnel. People screamed. Some ran toward the exits. Others became trapped behind collapsed steel beams. The camera shook violently before cutting to another angle. A young security guard was helping frightened passengers toward a service exit. Ethan stared at the screen. The guard looked exactly like him, not similar. Exactly. The same face, the same uniform, the same scar above his eyebrow. The recording continued. The young guard turned back one final time. A little girl stood alone on the platform, crying. Without hesitation, he ran back to save her. Seconds later, the tunnel ceiling collapsed. The image froze. The screen filled with static. The stranger's voice echoed softly through the empty control room. You've been asking the wrong question. Ethan slowly turned. The man in the black coat stood in the doorway. You wanted to know who the last passenger was. He removed his hat for the first time. His pale face was lined with age, but his eyes were filled with sadness rather than fear. No, Ethan. You were never following the last passenger. A long silence filled the room. The man looked directly into Ethan's eyes. You were the last passenger.
Ethan stood completely frozen. The words echoed inside his mind. You were the last passenger? No, Ethan whispered. He shook his head. I work here. I started this job tonight. The old man looked at him with sadness. That's what you believe. He walked toward the control desk and picked up Ethan's employee file, the file that had been sitting there since the beginning of his shift. He opened it. Inside were Ethan's personal details, his name, his photograph, his employment history. But something was wrong. The date of birth was missing. The address was blank. The entire record contained only one piece of information. Employee number 047. Ethan stared at the number. The old man noticed his expression. Everyone who comes down here receives the same number. Why? Because this station doesn't record who you were. The man looked toward the dark window overlooking Platform 3. It records who stayed. Suddenly, the station lights flickered. The familiar sound of approaching rails filled the building. 11:47 p.m. The last train was arriving again. But this time, Ethan understood. The train was not bringing passengers into the station. It was bringing them back. The doors opened. The passengers from Platform 0 slowly stepped inside the station. Silent, waiting. Among them was the young version of Ethan from the 1986 footage. The younger Ethan looked exactly as he had before the accident. He walked toward the older Ethan. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then the younger Ethan smiled sadly. I tried to leave too. A chill moved through Ethan. What happens now? The younger version of himself looked toward the arriving train. The same thing that happens every night. The passengers stepped inside. The doors began closing. The old man gave Ethan one final look. You can stay here forever, or you can become the person who warns the next one. The train disappeared into the darkness. The next morning, a new security guard arrived at Ashcroft Central Station, his first overnight shift. Before leaving, the manager handed him a ring of old brass keys and 3 warnings. The final warning was always the same. If you see someone get off the 11:47 train, don't follow him, because somewhere beneath the station, Platform 0 was still waiting.